everybody, welcome to today's recap for game number 11 of the World Chess Championship. We have Magnus Carlsen with the black pieces, which means Jan Nepomniachtchi has the white pieces, and although he's down 3 points in this match, I think everyone pretty much agrees that this is the final shot, the last chance. You have the white pieces, you have to try to make something happen, at least something ambitious. And clearly the goal for Nepo is to get a win here. He still technically has a draw to spare. So, the idea probably for his team is win with the white pieces, draw with the black pieces, win again with the white pieces, and so on. So, very difficult task ahead as he has to find a way to beat Magnus Carlsen, which he has not been able to do the entire match. But he has the white pieces, and he also had a rest day to prepare something. So, we'll see what he had in mind. E4. And Magnus goes with e5. I mean, sort of if it ain't broke, don't fix it. It's been working the entire match. Magnus is not about to play c5 or take some risks that he doesn't need to do. e5 has been solid, and it's been working. Knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4. So we do see the deviation by Jan. He goes for the Italian, something a little bit different. He's been playing the Ruy Lopez with bishop to b5 pretty much the entire match. And it means that, this probably didn't surprise Magnus too much. I mean, of course, Magnus is well prepped in the Ruy, but it's not like, the Italian escaped his preparation. So I'm sure he was not too surprised, but we do see a bit of a different, more fresh position here in game number 11. So just going to fast forward here up to the move a5. So Magnus plays a5, makes some space for the bishop, and also stops b4 from white. Otherwise, you might ask, why does black play the move a5? Well, first of all, sometimes in positions like this, just simply white gaining space is a plan of its own. So that's really one of the main ones. But in terms of this bishop, and sometimes maybe it getting trapped or attacked, if you don't want to lose the piece, then you often need a6 or a5, something to be able to drop the bishop back. And Magnus chose a5 here, but there's absolutely a school of thought for a6. A lot of it just comes down to preference, and there's very, very subtle differences between the two. Something that's, I think, just kind of difficult to explain at face value. There's not really a general rule for which one you do. Rook e1, and we see Magnus immediately play bishop a7. This isn't totally strange. You do see this kind of prophylaxis, but it is a little unusual to drop the bishop back to a7, I would say this early, and especially without white committing anything. Because normally, if I saw this move as white, I might be tempted to play knight a3, knight b5 to attack it, and then I would expect the bishop to return to b6. And I think that's what Magnus is intending. Whereas if you wait for white's pieces to develop and then move back, you obviously save some time. But the main reason Magnus did this is he doesn't want to be in the center to deal with d4. It's better for black if the move d4, you can react to that move with any move you want as black. Rather than if your bishop is here, then you're forced to either take or move your bishop back then, and there might be some situations where you don't want to have that kind of burden, let's say, to move your pieces. So you'd rather move them ahead of time. It gives you the freedom to do whatever you want in reaction to the d4 move later. And d4 is pretty much the main plan here for white. It always is in this opening. Knight a3 was chosen. h6, so Magnus is going for, a lot of waiting moves, a lot of moves that don't involve just immediate development. He's really trying to build up the position, finally castles. But most importantly, Jan sort of indicates with this move, he's kind of aimed towards the move d4. Probably see something like h3 in the future, as well as the bishop. Where can it develop? Well, most likely to e3. And move bit like bishop e3 makes sense for white because black's brought the bishop out and then moved it back. So now if he trades, it's going to be 3 moves with the same piece. So I understand where Jan's coming from here. But again, the more pieces you trade, remember, Magnus Carlsen only needs 2 more draws to win this match. So a draw here, setting himself up for a draw, needing to make a draw with the white pieces tomorrow is far too easy. Rook e8, a4. Bishop e6. Why not? I mean, look, Magnus is vacuuming pieces off the board while you could argue that white might have a slight edge here. You'd need a pretty good debate team because I just don't see it. I don't see anything coming from this opening, but I haven't seen anything come from Jan's e4 openings in general. There's been slight edges, slight pluses. He's had some good positions earlier in the match, but I haven't seen any position where he's really been able to push it. So queen b3, b6, rook d1, and I mean at this point white's kind of maximized. Like you might want to play h3, d4, but I mean your e-pawn is loose right now, so it's not that easy to play d4. After rook a1, I think Jan is he's got all his pieces to great squares. He's played a good game, but he hasn't played a game that's been very challenging. He hasn't gotten into a loose dynamic position, and I think those are the ones where when the tactics are flying, Magnus has maybe been vulnerable, or that's a place that Jan could target. But here, Magnus is going for standard stuff. This is a classic reroute of the knight to g6. Knight e7 also gets the knight off a square where it was undefended. We see h3, queen d7. I mean, look, Magnus is bringing the pieces to the middle. He's got his escape square. d4 is hard to achieve because, again, this pawn on e4 is loose. So Jan goes for knight h2, but I feel like he's just a little bit aimless here. He hasn't got anything out of the opening again, and it's frustrating to just make another draw against the world champion because you can sort of feel your hopes dwindling here. Rook d8, knight g4, and definitely knight g4. White wants to take with the pawn here, regardless of the fact that this is a match situation where Nepo needs a win. I think this is good regardless. You do have control over these squares, especially the f5 square now. But is this enough for an advantage? It's just not. I mean, I've just seen, from what I've seen from this opening, Nepo is really unambitious and doesn't really want it. Otherwise, I think we would see something better than just all these trades. Magnus's position has been way too easy to play at this point. And hey, that's not really a fault of Nepo. It's tough to just beat somebody on demand, especially someone like Magnus Carlsen, who throughout the match has demonstrated that that is near impossible to do. d5, d4 was played. And okay, I mean, d4 makes some sense. You're opening up the rook on the d file now that you see this move, and now that this knight has been traded off, white can finally play d4. But it's just too little too late. After pawn takes d4, I mean, black is totally equal here. There's nothing to discuss. If you take with the rook, there's rook takes e4. You might even just lose a pawn. So white takes on d5. But after this really stellar move, rook e4, I think Nepo realized that he doesn't have anything here in the way of an advantage at all. So after pawn takes here, instead of taking back, Magnus plays this really, really smart move, rook e4. We see queen c2 and rook f4, but you have to understand at this point, if white just takes his pawn back, for example, there's going to be knight takes d5, and if anyone's better here, it's Magnus. There's just no chances for Nepo in this position. Right? I mean, black's threatening to take all these pawns. White might do his own thing and maybe make a draw, but Jan's not winning this game. That's the point. And he needs to do that. Technically, 2 draws are needed for Magnus to win the match, but if Magnus draws this game, the next game he has the white pieces. He's looking like a favorite to make that draw as well. So I think it's tantamount to resigning the match or losing the match here. If you go into that. And Jan, after rook f4, which is a very strong move, the knight's hanging. You pretty much got to take this back, but then the d-pawn falls, and I don't really have another explanation for you guys here other than Jan just went a little crazy. He played the move g3. It attacks the rook. It might look like it traps it maybe in some lines, like, you go back, there's rook takes d4, suddenly white's better. But it's just a terrible, awful blunder. I don't see why Jan would have played it. I honestly thought at this point that Jan has been, probably ready to admit that the match has been over for the last couple games and is okay losing this game because, hey, it does end the match. And it's clearly going to go in Magnus Carlsen's favor. But I think I was watching one of his interviews just after the match, and he was saying that he initially thought of pawn takes knight, pawn takes rook, and didn't notice that queen takes pawn could be played, and was only calculating this. And it's like, okay, even if that is somehow the case, it's like, those type of miscalculations don't belong in a world championship match, to be quite frank. So Jan has been missing things all match. This is unfortunately just yet another example. G3 is a horrible blunder. And after pawn takes e3, take the rook, queen takes g4, king f1, queen h3, and Jan is already repeating, which basically tells the story. I mean, if you're going to play this move and then immediately shuffle your king, indicating that you'd be okay with a draw here, something's gone horribly wrong. And believe me, Magnus has some really strong moves available here, like, you know, pawn takes f2 and some rook d6, rook lift. But he goes with the move knight f5. I don't think this is really a situation where you criticize too much. I think it's your blunders are more important when they're critical. But here, I think Magnus has a winning position no matter what. He decides on knight f5. He sort of sees a path to victory here for himself. Knight f3, and he gets the queen exchange. He gets the material back, and then he gets a rook endgame. He's got a protected outside pass pawn, plus he's got this move rook to d2 happening. So it's just a crushing defeat here that Magnus Carlsen looks ready to administer. And the rest of this game is, well, I mean, we can see it play out here, but it's not terribly interesting, I'll tell you that. The technique from Magnus is up to snuff. Nepo's trying his hardest. He forces Magnus to go into a queen against rook, but with all the time on the clock, it's just not going to be competitive. And at this point, you can't even advance your a-pawn at the very end because you're just going to run into it. For example, queen here, hitting the pawn and the rook. Well, there's only one way to save everything, and that's rook here. And then, for example, you would lose your rook to a series of moves like this. So there really was just no hope. Lots of time on the clock too, no time pressure, none of that. Magnus was pretty decisive here, and after queen c5, after rook b6, he's hitting this pawn, it can't move. Rook a6 is even worse. I mean, you're just dropping pawns everywhere here, so there's nothing going on. There's nothing going on. Jan resigns, and that means that Grandmaster Magnus Carlsen is the current and still the world champion of the chess world. He wins the match by a score of 7.5 to 3.5, so 4-point margin. Definitely one of the biggest margins from any recent world championship, but it is fair to say that Jan, he just felt a little defeated ever since that really grueling Game 6 win, you know, of 136 moves, I think it was. So ever since then, I've felt like Jan's always been on the back foot. The start of the match was very promising for him and definitely looked very tepid. The players were sort of figuring each other out. But once Magnus got that big win in Game 6, which was back and forth, Nepo had his winning chances, let's be clear. But after that game, it felt really downhill for Nepo. He wasn't able to get back on his feet, and he started making uncharacteristic blunders over and over again. And unfortunately, it cost him the match, and it all came to fruition today. Magnus Carlsen wins with the black pieces. Jan goes a bit crazy with his g3 move. I don't really have a good explanation for it, but you know, a tense world championship match is going to make you do crazy things, and the match itself was also, you know, pretty much without doubt that it would go to Magnus Carlsen in any case. So I'm sure that Jan's not incredibly upset about the final game. It sort of felt like he was just going out on a whim. But that is the Game 11 recap. As I said, the World Championship match is in the books. In the end, it was a one-sided affair based on the score, but we all saw the beginning of the match. It was very close, and everything turned around in Game 6. So congratulations to Magnus Carlsen. He defends his title, and remains to be seen if he'll play the World Rapid and Blitz at the end of the year to see if he can get all the World Championship titles. But in any case, hope you guys have enjoyed the recaps and some of the regular daily coverage we brought you here. And we'll see you guys in future videos. Take care.